Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now, let's start. In the year of our Lord 1812, when waistcoats were high and morals purportedly higher, there lived a woman who had committed the most grievous of society's sins. No, dear reader, not murder, though the tongue might have forgiven that more readily, but the rejection of a prince. Gossip, like expensive French perfume, lingers long after the initial splash. And in London's hallowed halls, the whispers surrounding Lady Georgiana Greystone, the young Countess of Ravenscroft, continued to waft through drawing rooms nearly 5 years after she had done the unthinkable. Have you heard, one matron would whisper behind her fan to another, that she refused Prince Benedict of Johannia? Refused him? A prince? The other would inevitably gasp, as though hearing this morsel for the first time, rather than the 100th. The audacity! And now, a widow at 28. Providence has a way of teaching lessons to the proud, does it not? Providence, however, had done no such thing. The late Earl of Ravenscroft, a man 30 years Georgiana's senior, had been kind enough to expire from natural causes after a marriage of convenience that had lasted precisely 3 years, 2 months, and 4 days. He had left his young Countess with a tidy fortune, an imposing townhouse in Mayfair, and the freedom that only widowhood could bestow upon a woman of means in Regency England. Lady Georgiana, with her copper-gold hair and eyes the precise shade of emeralds, had settled into her widowhood with alarming comfort. While the matchmaking mammas of London predicted she would soon be desperate for companionship, the Countess had developed a reputation for turning down suitors with the same efficiency with which she managed her considerable estates. I find, she would say to her dearest friend, Lady Charlotte Pembroke, that life without a husband is remarkably peaceful. No snoring, no hunting talk, and no one to question my expenditures on books. Lady Charlotte, happily married herself, would shake her head. You cannot mean to remain alone forever, Georgie. It isn't natural. What isn't natural, the Countess would reply, is society's insistence that a woman must be married to be complete. I am quite complete on my own, thank you very much. And so she was, or so she believed, until the matter of her footman. The unfortunate incident began on a Tuesday, when Lady Georgiana's long-serving footman, Matthews, announced his retirement. After 40 years of service to the Ravenscroft household, the old man wished to return to his sister's cottage in Devonshire, where he might spend his final years watching the sea rather than watching for visitors at the Countess's door. This presents a problem, Georgiana declared to her butler, Simmons, a man so proper that one suspected he slept standing upright. Matthews has been with us since before I was born. Whoever replaces him must meet the most exacting standards. Indeed, my lady, Simmons replied, his face betraying nothing, though perhaps, if one looked very closely, there might have been the slightest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Shall I place an advertisement in the papers? No, she said decisively. That would invite all manner of unsuitable applicants. I shall inquire among my acquaintances. Someone must know of a footman seeking a new position. What Lady Georgiana did not know, but what we, dear reader, are privileged to learn, was that at that very moment, a man who was decidedly not a footman was planning his entrance into her household. Prince Benedict of Johannia, or simply Baron James, as he now styled himself, had returned to England after 5 years abroad with one purpose in mind. The prince, with his midnight dark hair and eyes of such a particular shade of blue that poets had likened them to the Mediterranean at dusk, had spent the intervening years since Lady Georgiana's rejection building a shipping empire that rivaled the East India Company. You realize this plan borders on madness, his friend, the Duke of Westmoreland, remarked as they shared a brandy at White's. Disguising yourself as a footman? You, who have never so much as tied your own cravat. Benedict smiled, the expression transforming his austere features into something that had caused no less than 3 debutants to faint during his previous London season. I have learned many things in my exile, Westmoreland, including how to tie an exceptional cravat. But why not simply call upon her? You're a prince, for heaven's sake. That, Benedict said, swirling his brandy, is precisely why she rejected me in the first place. The rejection had come during the Prince Regent's Grand Summer Ball of 1807. Lady Georgiana, then a debutante in her first season, had caught Benedict's eye immediately. Unlike the other young ladies who simpered and fluttered their eyelashes, Georgiana had engaged him in a spirited debate about maritime trade. By the end of the evening, Benedict had been thoroughly enchanted. The prince had pursued her with single-minded determination for the remainder of the season. He had sent sonnets, commissioned portraits, and once, in a move that had set tongues wagging for weeks, arranged for an entire conservatory of exotic flowers to be delivered to her father's townhouse. When he finally proposed, in the gardens of Vauxhall during a night of fireworks and champagne, he had been certain of her acceptance. Instead, she had looked at him with those remarkable green eyes and said, "I cannot marry a man who values his title more than his character. You pursue me as you would a prize thoroughbred, your highness. But I am not a mare to be added to your stable, nor a treaty to be negotiated. I wish to marry for love, not advantage." The rejection had stung all the more because, in his heart, Benedict knew she was right. He had pursued her as a conquest, dazzled by her beauty and wit, but never truly seeing the woman herself. "And now you believe that serving as her footman will somehow convince her of your reformed character?" Westmoreland asked incredulously. "I believe," Benedict replied, "that I must understand the woman she has become before I can hope to win her heart. And what better way than to observe her in her natural habitat, when she believes no one of consequence is watching?" Westmoreland shook his head. "You'll be discovered within a day. Care to wager on that? £500 says you'll be thrown out on your royal ear before the week is out." Benedict extended his hand. "Done." And so it came to pass that when Lady Georgiana mentioned to her friend Lady Charlotte that she was in need of a new footman, Lady Charlotte, whose husband happened to be a close friend of the Duke of Westmoreland, knew exactly where to direct her. "I've heard of a fellow," Lady Charlotte said casually over tea. "A baron's valet, recently returned from abroad. The baron died in Italy, and the poor man finds himself seeking a new position. They say he's exceptionally well trained." "A valet?" Georgiana frowned. "That seems rather overqualified for a footman." "Perhaps," Lady Charlotte shrugged, hiding her smile behind her teacup. "But these are difficult times. I'm sure he would be grateful for any respectable position." The next day, a man presented himself at the servants' entrance of the Countess's Mayfair residence. He gave his name as Mr. Benjamin James, and if the housekeeper thought his bearing unusually dignified for a servant, she said nothing of it. When Lady Georgiana interviewed him in her morning room, a custom she maintained despite Simmonds's protests that it was most irregular for the lady of the house to involve herself in such matters, she was immediately struck by something vaguely familiar about the tall, broad-shouldered man before her. "Have we met before, Mr. James?" she asked, studying his downcast eyes and the way he held himself with perfect stillness. "I doubt it, my lady," he replied smoothly. "I have been abroad for many years." She tapped her fingers against her writing desk. "Your references are impeccable, but I must confess I find it odd that a valet would seek a position as a footman. One must adapt to changing circumstances, my lady." "Indeed." She continued to study him, noting the way his livery, hastily acquired, none the less fit his frame as though it had been tailored specifically for him. "Very well, Mr. James. You may begin a trial period of 1 month. Simmonds will instruct you in your duties." Benedict bowed, careful to maintain the proper degree of servility. "Thank you, my lady. You won't regret your decision." Oh, but she would, dear reader. She most certainly would. The first week of Benedict's employment passed without incident. He learned the proper way to announce visitors, how to serve at table without making eye contact with the diners, and, with considerable effort, how to stand for hours without shifting his weight or betraying any sign of discomfort. Simmonds, initially skeptical of the new footman's abilities, gradually warmed to him. "You have unexpected talents, Mr. James," he remarked one evening as Benedict demonstrated his skill at polishing silver. "Most unusual in a man of your previous station." Benedict merely smiled. "I have always believed in the dignity of labor, Mr. Simmonds." Meanwhile, Lady Georgiana found herself inexplicably drawn to observing her new footman. There was something in his bearing, a certain grace that seemed at odds with his position, that continued to nag at her memory. "Charlotte," she said during their weekly promenade through Hyde Park, "do you not find it strange that your baron's valet appears so refined?" Lady Charlotte, who had been sworn to secrecy by her husband, who had, in turn, been sworn to secrecy by the Duke of Westmoreland, merely raised an eyebrow. Perhaps he modelled himself after his employer. Servants often do, I'm told. Perhaps, Georgiana murmured, unconvinced. Still, there is something about him that seems familiar, though I cannot place it. The true test of Benedict's disguise came the following week, when Lady Georgiana hosted a small dinner party. Among the guests was Lord Harrington, a notorious gossip who prided himself on his acquaintance with every person of quality in Europe. As Benedict served the soup, Lord Harrington squinted up at him. "I say, haven't I seen you somewhere before? At the Johannian embassy, perhaps?" Benedict kept his eyes lowered. "I wouldn't know, my lord. I've never had the honor of serving at an embassy." Lord Harrington continued to stare. "Most extraordinary resemblance. There's a prince from that region. What was his name?" "Ah, Benedict. That's it. You could be his twin, save for the livery." From her position at the head of the table, Georgiana froze, her spoon halfway to her lips. The name triggered a cascade of memories, moonlit gardens, passionate debates, and a proposal she had rejected because she had believed the man behind it incapable of seeing beyond her value as a suitable match. She looked sharply at her footman, noting for the first time the proud set of his jaw, the elegant hands that had seemed so familiar, and the way he carried himself with an innate authority that no amount of servile training could disguise. It couldn't be. It was impossible. And yet, "Mr. James," she said, her voice deliberately light, "Lord Harrington is in need of more wine." "Of course, my lady." Benedict moved to refill the glass, his expression betraying nothing. But Georgiana was watching closely now, and when their eyes met briefly, those distinctive Mediterranean blue eyes, she knew. The soup course was followed by fish, then by meat, then by dessert, and through it all, Lady Georgiana maintained her composure with the skill of a seasoned actress. She laughed at Lord Harrington's anecdotes, debated politics with Sir William Forsyth, and complimented Lady Forsyth on her new turban. Not once did she betray the storm of emotions raging within her. When the last guest had departed and the servants were clearing the dining room, she retired to her study and poured herself a generous glass of sherry. "Simmons," she called, "send Mr. James to me immediately." Benedict entered the study with the proper deference of a footman, but Georgiana was no longer deceived. "Close the door," she said coldly. He obeyed, then stood waiting, his eyes now meeting hers directly. "Do you think me a fool, Your Highness?" A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Never that, Lady Georgiana." "Then what possible explanation can you offer for this charade? Is it some elaborate joke? A wager with your dissolute friends?" "Neither." His voice had lost the careful modulation of a servant, returning to the rich, cultured tone she remembered from 5 years ago. "It was the only way I could think of to truly know you." "Know me?" She set down her glass with enough force to slosh the sherry. "You had an entire season to know me before you proposed marriage based on nothing more than my suitability as a princess." "And you were right to refuse me," he said quietly. "I was arrogant, entitled, and utterly blind to what truly mattered. I didn't see you, Georgiana, I saw a beautiful, accomplished woman who would make an appropriate consort. But these past 5 years have taught me much about value, worth, and what it means to build something with one's own hands rather than inheriting it." She studied him, noting the subtle changes time had wrought. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, and a weathered quality to his skin that spoke of actual exposure to the elements rather than the protected life of a royal. "So you've learned to polish silver," she said sarcastically. "How transformative." "I've learned far more than that." He took a step forward. "I built a shipping company from nothing. I lived among common sailors, learned their skills, earned their respect not through birthright but through competence. I've negotiated with merchants in a dozen countries, slept on deck during storms, and once spent 3 days in a Moroccan prison because I lacked the proper papers. Despite herself, Georgiana was impressed. The Benedict she had known had been pampered and privileged, never venturing beyond the comfortable confines of aristocratic life. And this masquerade as my footman? What was that meant to achieve? I wanted to see the woman you've become without the burden of our history coloring every interaction. I wanted to observe you when you weren't performing for society, to know if you were truly as remarkable as I remembered, or if my memory had gilded you in my absence. And your verdict, she asked, arching an eyebrow. My memory did you no justice at all. His gaze was steady, intense. You are far more extraordinary than I recalled. The way you treat your servants with respect but not condescension. How you manage your household with efficiency but not coldness. Your patience with Matthews as he trained me, even though you must have 100 more important concerns. Your genuine interest in your guests' opinions, even when they speak nonsense. Georgiana felt her cheeks warm. You've been watching me very closely, it seems. Every moment I could. He smiled, and she was struck by how that smile transformed his face, softening the aristocratic planes into something more human, more approachable. I particularly enjoyed observing your reading habits. Philosophical treatises at breakfast, poetry before bed, and those Gothic novels you hide behind cushions when visitors arrive. This is most improper, she said, though without much conviction. You've invaded my privacy in the most underhanded manner. I have, he admitted. And I will understand if you dismiss me immediately and expose my deception to all of London. But before you do, may I ask one question? She sighed. What is it? In all your reading, all your independence, all your careful management of your life, are you happy, Georgiana? The question caught her off guard. She had asked herself many things over the years, whether she was financially secure, whether she was fulfilling her responsibilities, whether she was maintaining her position in society appropriately, but happiness had rarely factored into her calculations. I am content, she said finally. Content. He repeated the word as though testing its weight. A tepid word for a woman of such passion. Passion is a luxury few women can afford, she replied sharply. Even widowed countesses. And if you could afford it? What would you do with such luxury? Images flashed through her mind, traveling to land she had only read about, pursuing her interest in botany beyond the confines of her conservatory, perhaps even publishing her observations under her own name rather than anonymously. And yes, perhaps loving a man who saw her as an equal rather than an ornament or a caretaker. That, she said, gathering her composure, is none of your concern, Your Highness. Now, I believe this interview is concluded. You will, of course, leave my household immediately. He bowed, the gesture caught between the formality of a footman and the dignity of a prince. As you wish. But before I go, I would like to extend an invitation. Not as a prince, nor as a footman, but as a man who has come to admire you deeply. An invitation to what, precisely? My ship, the Lady Emerald, is docked at London Harbour. I would be honoured if you would allow me to show you what I've built these past 5 years. No servants, no chaperones, just 2 equals conversing honestly for perhaps the first time. Georgiana knew she should refuse. It was scandalous enough that he had posed as her servant. To meet him unchaperoned on his ship would be beyond the pale. And yet, the woman who had once rejected a prince on principle found herself curiously drawn to the man who had humbled himself to serve in her household. I shall consider it, she said finally. Now go, before I call Simmons to throw you out. Benedict smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Until tomorrow, then. Noon, if it suits you. After he had gone, Georgiana remained in her study for a long time, contemplating the extraordinary turn of events. The prince she had rejected had returned, not with pomp and circumstance, but in disguise, learning her household, observing her daily life, serving her dinner guests. It was audacious. Inappropriate. Completely beyond the bounds of proper behavior. And yet, she could not deny the flutter of excitement she felt at the prospect of seeing him again, not as Prince or Footman, but simply as Benedict. The following day dawned bright and clear, a rarity in London's typically gloomy spring. Georgiana spent an inordinate amount of time selecting her attire, a morning dress of deep blue silk, neither too formal nor too casual, with a matching pelisse for the harbour's inevitable breeze. "I shall be out for the afternoon, Simmons," she informed her butler. "Lady Charlotte is expecting me for luncheon." It was the first time she had lied to Simmons in the 10 years he had served her, and from the slight lift of his eyebrow she suspected he knew it. But he merely bowed and said, "Very good, my lady. Shall I send for the carriage?" "No, thank you. I shall walk. It's such a fine day." Another raised eyebrow. The Countess of Ravenscroft did not walk unaccompanied through London streets as a rule. But again, Simmons merely nodded. What neither Georgiana nor Benedict knew was that at that very moment, Lady Charlotte was engaged in a heated discussion with her husband and the Duke of Westmoreland. "You did what?" she exclaimed, staring at the two men in disbelief. "You helped a prince disguise himself as George's footman? Have you both lost your minds?" "It was a harmless wager," the Duke protested. "And besides, James was determined to do it with or without our help. At least this way we could ensure he didn't completely embarrass himself." "Harmless?" Lady Charlotte's voice rose dangerously. "Do you have any idea what this could do to Georgiana's reputation if it becomes known? A man or a prince, no less, living under her roof, observing her private moments." "But that's just it," her husband interjected, "no one knows except for us. And James swore he behaved with perfect propriety." "That's hardly the point." Lady Charlotte paced the drawing-room. "Georgie values her independence above all else. This deception will wound her deeply, not just because of the potential scandal, but because it was a violation of her trust." The Duke and Lord Pembroke exchanged uneasy glances. Neither had considered the emotional implications of their scheme. "Perhaps," the Duke suggested, "we should warn James that his little charade may have consequences beyond what he anticipated." "Too late for that," Lady Charlotte said grimly. "If I know Georgie, she's already discovered the truth. And heaven help Prince Benedict when she decides how to respond." At precisely noon, Georgiana arrived at London Harbour. The Lady Emerald was easily identifiable, a sleek merchant vessel with emerald green trim and a figurehead carved in the likeness of a woman with flowing hair. It was neither the largest nor the most ostentatious ship in the harbour, but there was an elegance to its lines that spoke of careful design and quality craftsmanship. Benedict was waiting at the gangplank, dressed not in the finery of a prince nor the livery of a footman, but in the practical garb of a ship's captain. The transformation was remarkable. He looked at ease in a way she had never seen before, as though he had finally found clothing that suited the man rather than the title. "Lady Georgiana," he said, extending his hand to help her aboard. "I wasn't certain you would come." "Neither was I," she admitted, accepting his assistance. The brief contact of their hands sent an unexpected warmth through her gloved fingers. "I am still not convinced this isn't some elaborate scheme to restore your wounded pride." "A fair concern." He guided her onto the deck, where sailors moved about their duties with practiced efficiency. Each nodded respectfully to Benedict as they passed, but there was none of the obsequiousness one might expect toward royalty. "But as you'll see, this ship represents far more than an attempt to impress you. It's the culmination of 5 years' work and the foundation of my new life." "New life?" she questioned. "Have you abdicated your position, then?" "Not officially." He led her toward the stern, where a small table had been set with refreshments. "But my younger brother has been acting as regent in my absence, and I find I don't miss the trappings of court nearly as much as I expected to. There is a freedom in building something of one's own that no inherited title can provide." Georgiana settled into the chair he offered, noting the quality of the simple meal laid out: fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and a bottle of wine. No footman hovered nearby. Benedict served her himself, then took the seat opposite. "You've changed," she said, studying him openly now. The sun had darkened his complexion, and there was a confidence in his movements that came from physical labor rather than dancing masters. I had to. He poured wine for both of them. Your rejection forced me to examine myself in ways I never had before. It was uncomfortable. Good, she said, a smile tugging at her lips despite her determination to remain aloof. You were insufferably arrogant. I was, he agreed readily. Born to privilege, trained to command, and utterly convinced of my own superiority. Do you know what finally shattered that illusion? Enlighten me. My first voyage as an ordinary seaman. We encountered a storm off the coast of Portugal. I had studied navigation, understood the principles of sailing intellectually, but when faced with the reality of waves taller than buildings and winds that threatened to tear the sails to shreds, all my book learning proved worthless. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. The boatswain, a man who could neither read nor write, but who had been sailing since childhood, saved my life that night. He lashed me to the mast when I would have been swept overboard, then proceeded to help secure the ship with a competence I could only marvel at. That night, I understood what true worth was, and it had nothing to do with titles or education or birth. Georgiana listened, captivated despite herself. This was not the practiced charm of the prince who had courted her, but something rawer, more genuine. And so you built this shipping company, she said. Quite the change from royal duties. A more satisfying one. He gestured around them. The Lady Emerald is the flagship of a fleet of 12 vessels. We trade primarily in spices, textiles, and specialty goods from the Mediterranean and North Africa. No slaves, no opium, nothing that profits from human suffering. Admirable principles, she acknowledged. Though I imagine they limit your profits. They do, he agreed. But I have enough wealth from my royal stipend. This enterprise isn't about becoming richer, it's about creating something meaningful, providing honest work for good men, and perhaps making trade a force for understanding between cultures rather than exploitation. As they ate, Benedict shared stories of his travels, desert caravans in Morocco, midnight negotiations with Greek merchants, the discovery of a new variety of saffron in the mountains of Spain. Georgiana found herself laughing at his misadventures and asking questions that revealed her own extensive reading on foreign lands. You should see these places yourself, he said when she displayed particular knowledge of Mediterranean flora. Books can only convey so much. Women of my station don't generally embark on trading voyages, she reminded him dryly. Perhaps they should. The world would be richer for their perspectives. He refilled her wine glass. Now, I've dominated the conversation long enough. Tell me about your life these past 5 years. And to her surprise, Georgiana found herself speaking openly about her brief marriage to the Earl, a kind but distant man who had wanted a young wife to manage his household and had left her to her own devices otherwise. She spoke of her gradual assumption of control over her estates, her experiments with new agricultural methods, and her anonymous contributions to botanical journals. Anonymous. Benedict frowned. Why not publish under your own name? A countess writing scientific papers? The scandal would be unbearable, she said sarcastically. Women may dabble in watercolors or play the pianoforte acceptably, but serious intellectual pursuits are deemed unseemly. Another arbitrary constraint that serves no purpose but to limit human potential, he observed. In Morocco, I met female physicians whose knowledge of medicinal plants far exceeded anything I'd encountered in Europe. In Greece, women manage entire trading houses while their husbands are at sea. The notion that a woman's intellect is somehow inferior is not universal. You truly have changed, Georgiana marveled. The Prince Benedict I knew would never have questioned such fundamental aspects of our society. The Prince Benedict you knew was a fool, he said simply. Albeit a well-dressed one. They both laughed, and in that moment of shared humor, something shifted between them. The weight of their history, her rejection, his deception, seemed to lighten, making space for the possibility of something new. As the afternoon waned, Benedict gave her a tour of the ship. He explained the function of each sail, the purpose of various instruments, and introduced her to key members of his crew. Each man greeted her with respect but without the excessive deference she was accustomed to, and she found the experience refreshingly direct. They've no idea you're a prince, do they?" she asked quietly as they stood at the bow, watching the Thames flow past. "Only my first mate knows," he confirmed. "To the rest, I'm simply Captain James, a merchant who worked his way up from ordinary seaman." "And is that how you see yourself now?" He considered the question seriously. "I see myself as a man with choices. I can return to Johannia and resume my royal duties, knowing I'm better equipped to rule justly because of what I've learned. Or I can continue building this enterprise, making my own way without the constraints of court life. And if you choose the latter, then I would hope to do so with a partner who shares my vision, my values, and perhaps someday, my heart." The implication hung in the air between them, neither acknowledged nor denied. Georgiana turned to face the water, aware of his presence beside her, solid and real in a way that the prince of her memories had never been. "It's growing late," she said finally. "I should return home before Simon sends out a search party." Benedict nodded, though she thought she detected disappointment in his eyes. "Allow me to escort you." As they walked back through London's bustling streets, Georgiana found herself reluctant for their time together to end. The afternoon had shown her glimpses of a man she could respect, perhaps even care for, so different from the prince whose proposal she had rejected. At the corner near her Mayfair residence, she paused. "I wouldn't want to scandalize the neighbors by having a former footman seen at my door," she said, attempting levity. "Of course." He bowed slightly. "Thank you for coming today, Lady Georgiana. It meant more than I can express. Thank you for showing me your ship. It's impressive what you've built." A silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words. "Will you be leaving London soon?" she asked finally. "That depends." "On what?" His eyes met hers directly. "On whether there's a reason for me to stay." Georgiana felt her heart quicken. "I'm hosting a small musical tomorrow evening. Nothing grand, just a few friends and acquaintances. You would be welcome to attend, as Baron James, of course. I'm not quite ready to introduce a prince to my drawing room." A slow smile spread across his face. "I would be honored, Lady Georgiana." 8 o'clock, then. "Don't be late." "I wouldn't dream of it." With a final nod, she turned and walked the remaining distance to her home, aware of his gaze following her until she disappeared through the front door. What transpired over the following weeks became the subject of intense speculation among the ton. Baron James, a mysterious figure with impeccable manners but few connections, began to appear regularly at Lady Ravenscroft's side. They were seen riding in Hyde Park, attending the theatre, and once, most scandalously, visiting the British Museum without a chaperone. "I heard he's a merchant," whispered Lady Harrington to her circle of gossips. "Made his fortune in foreign trade. Hardly suitable for a countess." "But did you see the way he looks at her?" sighed young Miss Pembroke, a romantic at heart. "As though she hung the moon and stars." "More importantly," observed the pragmatic Mrs. Fitzhugh, "did you see the way she looks at him? I've never seen the Countess so animated." Indeed, those closest to Georgiana noticed a transformation. She laughed more readily, spoke more passionately, and seemed to glow with an inner light that had been dimmed since her youth. Only Lady Charlotte knew the full truth, having extracted a confession from her husband about the prince's true identity. She confronted Georgiana during one of their private afternoon teas. "So," she said without preamble, "you're courting the very prince you once rejected, and neither of you has seen fit to inform society of his true identity." Georgiana nearly choked on her tea. "How did you? My husband is terrible at keeping secrets, especially from me." Charlotte leaned forward. "Georgie, what are you playing at?" "If this becomes known, it won't," Georgiana interrupted. "Benedict has no intention of revealing his royal status. He prefers his new identity." "And you? Do you prefer him as a baron rather than a prince?" Georgiana considered the question. "I prefer him as the man he is now, thoughtful, humble enough to learn from his mistakes, confident enough to build something of his own. The title is irrelevant." Charlotte studied her friend's face. "You're in love with him?" It wasn't a question, but Georgiana answered anyway. I believe I am. Though we haven't spoken of it directly. And when you do, what then? Will you marry your former footman, knowing he's actually a prince in disguise? The deception at the heart of your relationship doesn't trouble you. It did, at first, Georgiana admitted. But I've come to see it differently. He didn't disguise himself to trick me, but to understand me. And in doing so, he allowed me to know him, the real him, not the prince behind the title, in a way few women ever know their husbands before marriage. Charlotte sighed. You always did have unconventional ideas. Just promise me you'll be careful. Hearts are delicate things, even for independent countesses. The true test of their growing attachment came during Lady Harrington's midsummer ball, the most coveted invitation of the season. Benedict escorted Georgiana, resplendent in a gown of emerald silk that matched her eyes perfectly. They had just completed their second dance of the evening when a hush fell over the ballroom. The Johannian ambassador, newly arrived in London, stood in the entrance, surveying the crowd. His eyes widened when they fell on Benedict, and he immediately began making his way toward them. Your Highness, the ambassador said loudly, bowing deeply. What an unexpected pleasure to find you here. The regent, your brother, has been most concerned about your extended absence. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom as every eye turned toward Benedict and Georgiana. The whispers began immediately, swelling into a buzz of speculation and shock. Prince Benedict. The Countess and a prince. Isn't he the one she rejected years ago? What scandal is this? Benedict straightened, his face composed despite the chaos erupting around them. Ambassador Karlov. Your timing is, as always, impeccable. Georgiana felt the weight of hundreds of stares, the judgment and curiosity beating against her like physical blows. But when she looked up at Benedict, she saw only concern for her in his eyes. Shall we give them something truly worth gossiping about? She murmured, a mischievous spark lighting her green eyes. Before he could respond, she reached up, placed her hand behind his neck, and drew his face down to hers. The kiss was brief but unmistakable, a clear declaration that left no room for misinterpretation. When she pulled away, the ballroom had fallen into stunned silence. I believe, Benedict said, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet, that Lady Ravenscroft has just answered a question I've been too cowardly to ask. He turned to face her fully. Though perhaps I should make it official. To the astonishment of the assembled ton, the Prince of Johannia dropped to one knee before the Countess of Ravenscroft. Georgiana, he said, using her given name for the first time in public, 5 years ago, you rightfully rejected a prince who saw your worth only in terms of your suitability as a royal consort. Today, I am asking you, not as a prince, but as a man who has learned what truly matters, if you would do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife. The ballroom held its collective breath. Georgiana looked down at him, her heart full to bursting. I once told you I wished to marry for love, not advantage, she said clearly. Does this proposal come from love, Benedict? From the deepest love imaginable, he replied without hesitation. A love born of admiration, respect, and the joy of discovering the remarkable woman you are, whether managing your household, debating shipping routes, or scandalizing society by kissing princes in public. Laughter bubbled up from her chest. In that case, yes. Yes, I will marry you, the sailor, the merchant, the prince, the footman. All the men you are, because together they make the man I love. He rose to his feet and kissed her again, longer this time, heedless of the scandal they were creating. When they finally broke apart, the ballroom erupted, some in applause, others in outraged muttering, but neither Benedict nor Georgiana paid them any mind. I should warn you, he said quietly, for her ears alone, that I have no intention of returning permanently to court life. If you marry me, it will be as the wife of a working shipowner who happens to have a royal title, not as a traditional princess. Her smile widened. And I should warn you that I have no intention of giving up management of my estates or my scientific pursuits. If you marry me, it will be as the husband of a botanist who happens to have a countess's title. I wouldn't have it any other way, he assured her, taking her hand in his. As they moved through the ballroom toward the exit, dignity intact despite the commotion around them, Lady Charlotte caught Georgiana's eye and raised her glass in a silent toast. Beside her, the Duke of Westmoreland was grudgingly counting out coins into Lord Pembroke's waiting palm. Apparently, a wager had been settled. The wedding of Prince Benedict of Johannia to the Countess of Ravenscroft took place 3 months later in the garden of her country estate rather than in a grand cathedral. The bride wore a simple gown of cream silk adorned with embroidered botanicals from 3 continents. The groom wore the uniform of a merchant captain rather than royal regalia. Among the small gathering of guests were the crew of the Lady Emerald, several tenant farmers from the Ravenscroft estates, and a select group of friends who had supported their unconventional courtship. Conspicuously absent were the gossips and social climbers who had feasted on rumors of their relationship. Most surprising to society was the presence of Matthews, the retired footman, who had travelled from Devonshire to attend. When Lady Harrington, who had somehow secured an invitation despite not being particularly close to either bride or groom, questioned his presence, Georgiana merely smiled. "Without Matthews, I would never have needed a new footman," she explained. "And without that need, I might never have discovered that the perfect match for me had been serving dinner in my own home." After the ceremony, as guests mingled on the lawn enjoying champagne and sunshine, Benedict drew his new wife aside. "Happy?" he asked, searching her face. "Extraordinarily so," she assured him. "Though I'm still not entirely convinced this isn't an elaborate plot to salvage your wounded pride from my first rejection." He laughed, the sound free and joyous. "If it was, it certainly took a circuitous route. 5 years at sea, building a company, masquerading as a footman, all to win the hand of a woman who once told me my character was lacking." "When you put it that way, it does seem rather excessive," she conceded, leaning into his embrace. "But I'm glad you persisted." "As am I." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now, about our honeymoon." "Yes? How do you feel about combining it with a trading voyage? The Lady Emerald is scheduled to sail for Greece next week. I thought you might enjoy collecting specimens of Mediterranean plant life for your studies." Her eyes lit with excitement. "You would take me on a working voyage?" "I would take you anywhere you wish to go," he said simply. "Though I should warn you, as captain's wife, you'll be expected to share his cabin. It's quite small compared to what you're accustomed to." "I believe I can adapt," she said, her voice warm with promise. "After all, I've already adjusted to the shocking discovery that my footman was a prince in disguise. And I've adjusted to the equally shocking discovery that the woman who rejected a prince would accept a merchant captain." "Not just any merchant captain," Georgiana corrected, rising on her toes to whisper in his ear. "My merchant captain. My prince. My Benedict." And as they rejoined their guests, hand in hand beneath the summer sky, the Tun's most eligible widow and the prince who had once been her footman began their life together, not as the conventional royal couple they might have been, but as partners in a love story entirely of their own creation. For is that not, dear reader, the greatest luxury of all? To write one's own story, with a companion who sees not just the title or the fortune, but the person beneath. Lady Georgiana Greystone, who became Princess Georgiana of Johannia while retaining her identity as a scientist and landowner, would certainly say so. As would Prince Benedict, who continued to captain his own ships long after their marriage, with his botanical princess often by his side. And if society whispered about the scandalous beginning of their courtship? Well, the happiest love stories often begin with the breaking of rules, and sometimes, with the hiring of a footman who is far more than he appears to be.